Welcome to a meeting of the Brockton City Council Finance Committee for Monday, March 15th, 2021. This meeting is being held in accordance with Governor Charlie Baker's emergency order, which relieves a public body from the requirements of the open meeting law, meeting in public, and allows for a remote meeting so long as we provide an alternative means to view the proceedings and the votes. This meeting is being recorded. It will be on Brockton Community Access, and it will be on YouTube Live. I recognize a quorum, and I also recognize Councilor Thomas Monahan.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, over the weekend, we lost a great champion of the city in Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He was arguably, well, maybe not arguably, the best middleweight champion in boxing has ever seen. During the mid-'80s, he defended his championship 12 times. He was probably in the most famous, most exciting fight ever against Thomas Hearns. And I was lucky enough to actually go to that fight. It was fantastic. But I'd just like to send out condolences, have a moment of silence to his family right now. Thank you. May he rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
Amen.
Thank you, Councilor. Madam Clerk, item number 1.
Of James Sweeney of 33 Montrose Street, Brockton, Massachusetts, 02301, to the Planning Board for a 5-year term ending March 2026. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, James Sweeney.
Mr. Sweeney, I know you're with us. Would you care to make a brief statement?
Sure. Thank you for having me here and hearing me out. I was born and raised in the City of Champions. Very proud moment following Mr. Hagler's career, and very devastating to everybody. Educated in Brockton. I have a business degree. I've been in real estate for almost 20 years in sales, almost $100 million worth of sales revenue. I'm also a teacher in Taunton. Along my education road path, I've worked at Brockton High School for 4 years. I've been a substitute in almost every school in Brockton, and I would be looking forward to the opportunity of serving in this position.
Councilors, please don't use it against Mr. Sweeney, but I've known him since he was 18 years old, so I'm feeling a little over the hill tonight.
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
On the motion. On the motion.
Councilor Castro.
Thank you. She was too fast for me. Good evening, Mr. Sweeney. Thank you very much for being in front of us. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware. The planning board invariably deals with matters that result in projects that real estate brokers get involved in. But you surely know that you wouldn't be able to be involved in any of those projects. And I hope you're okay with that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
totally
to
understood.
do otherwise would be a conflict of interest.
Absolutely. I would imagine in that circumstance, I would remove myself from any of those dealings.
Right. Or else not get involved afterwards. Right. That's right.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Anyone else? We have a motion to recommend favorably. It has been properly seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Azak,
Yes.
Cardozo,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Eaniri,
A wonderful Ward 3 resident, yes.
Farwell,
Yes.
Lally,
Yes.
Mendez,
Yes.
Monahan,
Yes.
Nicastro,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative.
Recommended favorably to the full city council. Mr. Sweeney, this will be voted on next Monday evening. You do not have to be present. The full council will act on this favorable recommendation.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, number 2.
Of Laura Beekler of 37 Fern Ave, Brockton, Massachusetts, 02301, to the Conservation Commission for a 3-year term ending March 2024. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, Laura Beekler.
Good evening, Laura. Would you like to make a brief statement?
I'm sure. Thank you for having me this evening. My family actually just moved here 3 years ago. We're new to Brockton. We absolutely love it. We bought a home from being 20 years on the North Shore. So coming down here was quite a change, and it's been a wonderful community. I am looking forward to serving in whatever capacity is needed for the city. I currently hold the Ward 1 position for elections, and I've been trying to get more and more involved. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Councilors, any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilor Azar.
I would just like to thank the mayor for these amazing appointments to the Conservation Commission. Ms. Beechler's resume is very impressive, and I have met her during election times at the polls, and we're very lucky to have residents that want to serve on our boards and commissions. So thank you for this. Thank you for serving, and thank you, Mayor, for these really amazing appointments of amazing women in our city. With that, I recommend this favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Second.
All right, a motion has been made and seconded to recommend favorably. If there's no further discussion, would the clerk please call the roll?
Azak,
Yes.
Cardozo,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Eaniri,
Yes.
Farwell,
Yes.
Lally,
Yes.
Mendez,
Yes.
Monahan,
Yes.
Nicastro,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
and Thompson.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative.
Recommended favorably to the full city council. Laura, this will be voted on next Monday evening by the council. You don't have to be present, but we thank you very much for your willingness to serve the city of Brockton.
Number 3.
Madam Clerk, item number 3.
Ordered that the request made by the mayor on behalf of the DPW Commissioner, Larry Rowley, that there be a hearing on the executive summary for the Integrated Water Infrastructure Vulnerability Assessment and Economic Development Plan for the Climate Resiliency for the City of Brockton by Fussin O'Neill to address questions and concerns by the City Council pertaining to the report. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, Lawrence Rowley, Commissioner of DPW, Chike Odunukwe, City Engineer.
Councilors, this agenda item is to give us an overview of why a public hearing is required on this particular work. And we do have Commissioner Rowley with us along with Chike. So Commissioner, if you'd like to make a statement.
Yes. Good evening, councilors. Councilors, the long and short of this is you'll probably learn a lot more when Fussin O'Neill comes in and does their presentation in probably 3 or 4 weeks. It was a grant that we received in 2019, and it was a study to develop in the understanding of the flood risks in the city. So we applied for the grant. We got it. It's been, to be honest with you, it's been a long-winded study because of COVID. We had to shut it down for a little bit, but it's going to be very beneficial to the city because now we know how, when, and why the flooding occurs, and this could lead into some construction that could solve a lot of that flooding. If Chike, you want to say a little bit more, I think that when Fussin O'Neill comes in and does their presentations, you'll learn a lot more about what we've been going through with this study.
Okay, the reason we are coming before the city for the presentation, because of the COVID, the in-kind service we're supposed to provide, we couldn't do that. So the total project is about 400,000, and the city is supposed to provide 20% in-kind service. Coming before the city council will give us opportunity to make up some of this money, and also have that presentation taken out to the community. Whoever looks at it and comments on it may give us some of that money. The state computes how much each commentator give us in our match fund. So if we present it and it goes out and we get comments on it, that will reduce the amount that will come out of the pocket of the city. And also any city employees that listens to it at the same thing, that will be even better because they will be billed at how much the city, at the rates the city pays them. Residents are billed at lower rates. So if we get more city employees to look the day of the presentation to tune in and listen to it, anytime they spend there will be billed, will be charged to the state as if they have worked on the project. So that's why we're trying to make this presentation.
Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to clarify what Mr. Chike was speaking about. So you're stating that if more people attend the FUS presentation, that would be financially beneficial to the city?
Yes.
Okay. So we should definitely get the word out on that. So looking at reading the report and then looking at the cost range for the recommended improvements to Ellis Pond and some of the surrounding areas, it currently has a cost range in that $5 to $10 million range. Now, is there any EPA or DEP grants or subsidies that would help offset this cost?
Yes. They have grants every year we can tap into to bear most of the cost. Some will come from the city, but majority of it comes from the federal and state government.
Okay, so was that where you were saying that what 20% would come from the city, the rest of the cost potentially from an EPA or DEP grant?
Yeah, most MVP grants are done that way, but
Okay.
each grant is not all of them are going to be MVP. We have other grants we can apply. Some of them then ask for match fund, but most of them do.
Okay, and from my understanding, this presentation tonight, the one from FUS coming up within a month or so, those are all prerequisites to be eligible for any future grant in this area?
Come again?
Saying,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
That-
they have to complete this for us to be eligible to ask for grant to do the construction.
Okay. And if this matter went forward, what would be the time frame for these upgrades? Will this happen next year, next fiscal year?
This particular one have to end in June. We have to finish everything in June. It's after that we'll start looking for funding for implementation.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that presentation, and I guess I'll wait for more technical questions to when they're before us. I appreciate your time, Mr. Chike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Commissioner Rowley, if you and I can have an offline conversation, we'll find out dates when Fuss and O'Neill would be available. We'll make sure there's adequate advertisement for the hearing to encourage as much participation as possible.
Please, because of the June deadline, they want the presentation as soon as possible.
I agree. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Nicastro.
thank you. Good evening, Larry and Chike. Thank you for being with us. I did exchange messages with Larry over this executive summary this afternoon because, well, I'd love to see the pictures in color because in black and white, it's hard to tell. But the areas that are identified that are in Ward 4, Kmart Plaza, Riverview Street neighborhood, Perkins Avenue, Plain Street. I know we have terrible flooding problems there. I was telling Larry today that I have a number of houses that are on Perkins Avenue between Layden and Riverview that in the springtime especially, there are several feet of water in their backyards. It looks like they've got lakefront property. And you know, what do we do? It's not their fault. So I'm most interested in this. I want to read the entire report. Please send it to me in color. And I will work with you and do whatever I can to help with this. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Counselor. Anyone else?
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Second.
There's been a motion made and properly seconded. If there's no further discussion, would the clerk please call the roll?
Azak,
Yes.
Cardozo,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Eaniri,
Yes.
Farwell,
Yes.
Lally,
Yes.
Mendez,
Yes.
Monahan,
Yes.
Nicastro,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
11 in the affirmative.
Recommended favorably to the full city council. Madam Clerk, item number 4.
Resolved that the mayor and the chief finance officer of the city come before the finance committee to discuss the status of establishing a fund and allocation of said fund relative to the marijuana impact tax fees, and to further discuss any taxes which have already been received from the marijuana impact tax fees and how those funds have been spent in the city. Be it further resolved that the city council recommend to the mayor that the city of Brockton create a fund for the marijuana impact tax fees to create a recreation and innovation center that substantially supports the youth, over 17,000 children of the city of Brockton. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Megan Bridges, City Solicitor, Shannon Resnick, Legislative Counsel.
Welcome all. Councilor Cardozo, I believe you filed this, so under our rules, you speak first if you'd like to kick it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, councilors. Good evening, Mayor and Troy. Thank you for being here to discuss this. So we've had many discussions around marijuana on the council, and by now we all know how communities of color have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs and why social equity is important in this industry. And we've taken some steps to address this by amending our ordinance and having these discussions. So tonight is a continuation of these discussions. We have 2 resolves in front of us. And this first one is to just address the taxes that have been collected and, how much have we collected, how much has been spent, and if there's a possibility of establishing a fund with these the impact fees that we're collecting. So I appreciate, Troy, Mr. Clarkson, you sent us some information earlier this afternoon. So just to clarify a little bit for the public, how much did we receive in FY20 and in 2021? And if you do any forecasting, if you can explain that, and then also explain how we can establish a separate fund for these fees that we collect.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, okay to answer that?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. Happy to answer that question. And just to, for members of the public that are watching, I did provide the city council and the mayor an explanation earlier today about how the process has worked thus far and about the revenue that the city has gained. So in all of last year, that was fiscal 2020, the city received just over $586,000 in direct payments from marijuana vendors. Thus far to date, the city has received about $296,000. Those are direct payments from licensed vendors in the city. In addition, those vendors pay money to the state, and a portion of that comes back much the way the meals tax does. And so in additional funding in FY20, the city received back approximately $94,000, and thus far this year, approximately $253,000. Now, in November of 2019, the city council did pass an order expressing its legislative intent on where those funds should go. What has not happened yet is a separate fund being set up to hold those funds. So right now, unless and until that fund is created, and it can be created. I did provide the city council with some guidance from the Commonwealth on just how that would happen. It would essentially set up what's called a special stabilization fund, much like the stabilization fund we have now, but it's set up for a specific purpose. So right now, the money goes into the general fund and then is allocated with other funds that come in that support the budget and the priorities of the mayor and the council when the budget is passed. So it most certainly is possible to set up a fund. We do not have one yet, but I'm happy to work with the mayor and the council to set one up should you choose to move in that direction.
Okay, and Mr. Clarkson, as far as forecasting what we can generate, I know we've made some changes in our ordinance. So if we have 14 licenses now, is that something that you can do? Can you forecast how much we can bring in?
Most certainly. In fact, we have for this year and for last year, not knowing what the status was of the industry in the city, we did not count the marijuana revenues as part of our revenue projections. All that means really is every penny then that came in would go to free cash and help the city improve its free cash position. But now that the council is working on more closely defining what the industry will look like, that will certainly give my team and I assistance in projecting what the actual revenue will be for next year.
Okay, and can we be specific in what, if we do establish this fund, what we can spend it on?
So you can certainly express the feelings of the council and limit. I know that the city solicitor and the legislative council are on the call too. You can create a fund for a specific purpose, and so a special stabilization fund requires a supermajority to spend money out of it. So yes, you can create a fund with a specific purpose if the money is in that fund, and I believe that the law says at least 25% of the revenues have to go into that fund. So if they are general funds, then the answer to the question is yes, but only through the regular budgeting process. If it's money in the special fund that you set up, then you do have the ability to limit by the creation of the fund how the money is spent.
Okay, and can you, just to clarify, to date, the monies that we have collected, what have they been spent on? Is that something you can?
Well, because they are part of general funds, they just contribute to the overall budget. So you can't draw a direct line between the marijuana money and any specific expenditure. Rather, the money that comes in supports the entirety of the budget. And so those, as I always say, a budget is the most important policy document, and in the first instance denotes what the policy priorities are of the mayor, and then when it goes to the council, also then demonstrates what the policy priorities are of the city council.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And for Mr. Mayor, just one quick question. Would that be something, you know, we've been talking about youth programs for a while now, and you came in front of us recently and spoke about your priorities as far as the youth in the city. Would these funds, setting up this fund, would that be something that you would consider for a youth, more to support more youth programs, specifically this innovation center that everyone's been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely, Councilor. I want to thank you for filing this resolve. I mean, all of us have a true vested interest in the youth and providing services, emotional and physical and educational, to the youth. So without question, you know, when I sat on the city council and Councilor Rodriguez was the mayor, you know, I was happy to take that vote that night. I guess it was step one. I guess we have to do, the legislative body has to do an additional step for the stabilization, but I will proudly support a vote of the council on a proportional share that would help the youth in the city of Brockton. Council, thank you.
Thank you very much. So just one last question, Troy. So how do we proceed from here as far as setting up that fund?
Well, I'll work with the mayor and the city solicitor to put the language together, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clarkson. Mr. Chair, I'm all set with this resolve if other folks want to ask questions.
All right, Councilor
Thank you.
Rodriguez. All right, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, maybe I'm going through a time warp or something like this, because I thought, going back to the days when I was the mayor here in the city in November of 2019, we had established a guideline and how to set up this whole process in terms of setting up this account. And I don't quite understand why it's taken so long from November of 19 till now that we have not set this thing up, Troy. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, what's the delay, or what are some of the reasons why it has prevented you from setting this thing up?
So I don't think that there's necessarily been a delay. The city council expressed, and Councilor Rodriguez is correct. When he was mayor, I worked closely with him on expressing what was then Mayor Rodriguez's intent for how the money should be spent. And obviously, I assume still is Councilor Rodriguez's intent of how the money should be spent. So that was within the purview of the council, and you expressed that opinion. That from there, the money, as I said, has just gone and has been gone to the general fund. And so the next step, the next legislative step, is to set up that fund. And it just obviously has not occurred yet, but it certainly can.
Mr. Clarkson, I'm not exactly sure if we are on the same wavelength here, but to me, it doesn't matter who the mayor is. If a council goes as far as setting up a particular order, to me, it becomes law in the city, and it doesn't matter who the mayor, the follow-up mayor is, or the following mayor is. So if an order in a will of a council is established as a law, we can't keep going back. Anytime the new mayor comes in, we take another 20 steps backwards, because that might not be the wishes of a mayor. I mean, my whole thing is, if a council sets up an order, to me, that order becomes law. And unless it comes back to the council to change, we should not going backwards and undo some of the things that were done. And I'm getting a little fed up with this whole thing, to be honest with you, because we go through this process. It happened with setting up of the Health and Human Services Department. A year and a half later, we're still talking about it like it never existed. Now we're dealing with this issue with setting up this thing that we talked about at a great length when I was mayor, or when I was in the committee that set up the entire ordinance for our marijuana process here in the city. But for some odd reason, it seems like every time we take 2 steps forward, we're going back another 5 to 10 steps. And I don't quite understand that, to be honest with you.
So I would just suggest, council, we certainly haven't taken any steps backward. The city council took a very affirmative step and expressed its desire for when and if a separate fund is set up, how the money should be spent. I think that intent was clear, and that remains. And so when the time comes, if the time comes that a separate fund is set up, then the intent of the council of how the money gets spent will be available and is the law. That has not changed, I think. So I certainly understand the point that you're making, but the fact remains that in order for the money to be spent in a particular way, a fund has to be set up to do that.
But how long does it take? Why does it take over a year and a half to set up a fund that the council basically has decided, X number of percentages are going to go towards something? Why is it taking so long to set up?
I think the best answer I can provide to that, Councilor, is that in the intervening time between when the city council passed this and today, there have been certainly a host of priorities for the council to consider, including all of the COVID issues and the public safety complex. And so your plate has been full.
No, I understand. I understand that the plate has been full, but it seems to me a little senseless. Every so often we go back and rehash some of the things that we had already hashed out. in the past because we continue to do this. And to me, it's getting a little frustrating that we have to sit here and figure out, okay, 2 years from now, who's the next mayor going to be before we can move forward in certain things. And it's getting to be a little tiring, to be honest with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have counselors waiting. However, Legislative Counsel Resnick has some background information on this issue. Any objection to letting her jump in first? Here's none. Go ahead, Attorney Resnick.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to let you know so that in preparation for this item, I went back and reviewed the minute meetings from the Finance Committee meetings that kind of led up. And so what happened was there was 2 separate orders that were presented to the council, kind of late fall 2019. One was an order that would establish this specialized stabilization fund. A second order was kind of like the percentage, this percentage to this designation, this percentage to that designation. At some point in November of 2019, there was interest of this council to table both of those items. So they were tabled by this council in November of 2019. I think because of knowing that there was going to be a change with the mayor at the election years, and just that would become a priority of the council in 2020 to take care of it. Then at the next meeting, the only thing that was submitted was a new proposal with this, what Troy emailed to everyone, that you guys got. And so that was the only thing that the council acted on. So it was a decision of the council back in November of 2019 to table the creation of the stabilization fund. But so the good news is that there's already work on it. We can copy it and submit it to the council. And then the question and the debate from those minutes was that the council can designate at least 25%, but up to 100%. And I think the council was just interested in having a discussion as to how much that would be. So I just wanted to provide you that background.
So to clarify, Attorney Resnick, the order that was passed on December 8 to 9, 2019, that is still valid and binding, and that has the percentage allocations to the different categories of the marijuana revenue.
Correct. So if the council wanted to change that, you could amend that order or submit a new one to replace it. That can still happen, and kind of start from scratch, if you will. But they can't make the money that's coming in go to those spots without actually having the stabilization fund set. So it's like we passed step B, but we needed to pass step A.
All right. Well, council is waiting. Councilor Castro, followed by.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I have the November 25th order in front of me that was approved on December 9th. And the 2 paragraphs deal with different areas, because the first paragraph says, the council dedicates the following percentage, not less than 25% of the local option excise on retail marijuana sales revenues to a community impact stabilization fund. That's established under MGL Chapter 40, Section 5B. I don't understand. That doesn't establish that fund, that first paragraph? Councilor Resnick?
No, there had to have been a separate order requiring a 2/3 vote. So I can, if the council's interested, I can put into the chat function an attachment to the minute meetings. And some of you weren't on the council in 2019, but you can kind of see how there were 2 separate orders. And that's just kind of how municipal finance works.
Okay, thank you. But then the second part of this, the breakdowns up to 25%, 20%, and so forth. It's the following is yearly funded distribution generated from medical marijuana, not from retail. So it seems to me that we have to either amend this to make it not just medical, but also retail, or we need a new order or something. And certainly we need another order creating that second stabilization fund.
And that would have been true because in 2019, you only had the medicinal sites in operation.
Right. That's right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councilor Eaniri.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to clear my mind, and I think everyone needs to know that, and I think they understand, as we sit here and we discuss the types of monies that can come back in, medical or recreational, I think we ought to wait for other businesses to come into play here. Keep in mind, councilors, we have one business alone in good health on West Chestnut Street that is bringing in money, medical and recreation. Again, one business alone. We have others that are supposedly going to be opening up. Christmas will be here soon. And we have others that still want. That's all well and good. So we have a total of 14 licenses at some point in time. Fine. Why we're worried about where it's all going to go and how it's going to go, I think is probably important. But let's have some of the money to make sure it's going to be going there soon. It's going to end up going there later than sooner. And I think everybody needs to understand that. And I think if you really dived in and found out what In Good Health has probably brought back medical recreational to the city of Brockton, and since he's been in order and since in place since 2015, it's probably about $1.8 million. So maybe we need to know just how that has been divvied up in that one business alone. Then we can worry about how we're going to do the other. And understand the fact the other one is somewhat still binding. And I also noticed the same thing that Councilor Castro noticed as well, because you're talking about medical in one part of it, and then it goes to recreational. So I think that order, as our legal counsel said, needs some work. But I just want everybody to keep in mind, even our chief financial officer, we have one business that's been operating since medical marijuana was put into place in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts back in 2014. And when he went into business in 2015 and went to the location that we found was in the best place for it to be located. And he's the only one that's bringing revenue in right now. Let's all see how the rest of them all do before we start figuring out where and what percentages is going to go where and how much and what we can do and can't do. I just wanted to make that clear for my own peace of mind and for people that are listening, that we're not getting rich here at this point in time like we thought we were. We're not. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome, Councilor. Councilor Lally.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would have to agree with Councilor Eaniri about waiting and let's see what hatches before we count our chickens. But I would also, I want to say I've got no problem with earmarking a certain amount of money to go toward youth programs. I think that the more things for kids to have, the more things for them to do, I think that's fantastic. But I would say that I would not support reserving all of this funding exclusively for programs like that, especially when we don't know what kind of income that is. I go by the logic, pot money for potholes. And I would like to see a significant amount of that money put into the crumbling infrastructure that we have to deal with. We've taken steps to improve the roads and pipes that we have, but the improvement has the steps we've taken have sped up the improvement process, but not nearly enough. I represent 208 streets, and I could give you about 178 of them that need to be paved in the next 5 years. Probably 100 of them need to be paved now. This stuff, the more we can throw at it, the better. And the DPW is doing a magnificent job of keeping things going with what they have. But this is a new source of revenue, and I don't think it would be wise of us to tie it all up before we know what we're dealing with. And I don't think it would be wise to pour everything we're getting into one spot. It writes itself, pot money for potholes. I think we got to put more investment into the infrastructure. I get a call every day about the roads and about the pipes, and I wouldn't be doing my job representing my constituents if I did not bring that to the fore as much as I could. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Councilor. Councilor Cruz. You're on mute, Counselor.
You're muted.
Lots of people would like that permanently, but actually, most of what I had to say has been asked and answered. I'm a little disappointed in us that we, as I read this, we passed Part B and not Part A. I was under the impression we actually had created the fund. We'll have to get working on that and get that done ASAP, because this was supposed to be for fiscal year 20 that we were using this fund. So we'll have to get moving on that and get that done. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Counselor Razak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is really quick. So just to clarify, Mr. Clarkson, the figures you gave us that were received for FY 20 and 21 directly to the city, and then what came into the city from the state, those were all from just In Good Health, no other business, right? Because they're the only ones that are open.
I believe that's correct. I can certainly confirm that, Counselor, but I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Anyone else before I go second round?
Just one comment. Mr. President?
Yes.
Councilor Eaniri, just if I might make just one comment, I just want to make sure, because of the question that Shirley just asked, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but if there are other monies coming in, then we got some people out there doing some illegal work for the city, and I hope that's not transpiring. I don't think it is. So keep that in mind. Again, we only have one facility that's sending us any types of money right now. So, remember, before you buy the brand new car, you got to have the money to pay for somewhat of it, or don't bother buying the brand new car. So let's keep in mind of, what we got to do here. There's still work to be done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just to Councilor Eaniri, I understand that my question really was because I know Commonwealth Alternative Care also holds a medical marijuana license, and I'm not sure if these fees come, if they're paying licensing fees. So that was the reason for my question, is to see, is this just from sales or is it from other fees that these businesses may be paying? So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Councilor Cardozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to Councilor Eaniri's point, Mr. Clarkson, that's why I asked about forecasting expected revenues from the licenses that we do have given out or will be giving out. So it's still important to set up this fund, correct? No matter if we've only received set amount from In Good Health, we still need to establish this fund, like to Councilor Rodriguez's point, should have been established a while ago. So this is something that we still can move forward on, regardless of what, who has paid their taxes or who hasn't paid their taxes, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And then to Councilor Lally's point, we understand infrastructure is important, but there's also, we've just went through a pandemic, and these kids, again, I'm going to say it again, have been home for a year, and there are going to be a lot of issues that we have yet to, even begin to comprehend, and we want to be prepared for that. So that's all that I'm always advocating for, is that we have a plan to manage mental health in this city, not just for our youth, there are a lot of adults suffering as well, and to make sure we have things for them to do to occupy them. If we're going to talk about safety in the city, that's how we tackle safety, is early on, but making sure that we have recreation, jobs, and all of that to keep our kids safe. But thank you all for your attention.
Mr. Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Clarkson?
Yes, sir.
Just a request for information for the council. Would you and the mayor, if you do forecast what you think may be revenues, particularly for FY 22, would you give us your best judgment on what portion of that you think should be reserved? Because I know we're going to be doing borrowing for the schools, and I know the bond rating companies don't like all of your revenues spoken for, so to speak. So I think your professional judgment on what limit we might be looking at, in other words, how much money could we use for youth activities? I think it's important for us to know that. I'd like to have some idea of what might be available for the council in the coming fiscal year. So if you could get that to us at some point, I appreciate it.
Certainly happy to do that.
If there's nothing further, is there a
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to recommend favorably. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Azak,
Yes.
Cardozo,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Eaniri,
Yes.
Farwell,
Yes.
Lally,
Yes.
Mendez,
Yes.
Monahan,
Yes.
Nicastro,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
No.
Thompson,
Yes.
10 in the affirmative.
Recommended favorably. Madam Clerk, item number 5.
Resolved that the mayor come before the Finance Committee to discuss establishing a committee on cannabis industry in the city of Brockton, comprised of residents and city councilors, to ensure the social equity and economic empowerment applicants have access to participate as licensed owners in marijuana operations in the city. Be it further resolved that the city council recommend the establishment of this committee by the mayor. Invited Mayor Robert Sullivan, Megan Bridges, city solicitor, Shannon Resnick, legislative counsel.
Councilor Cardoza?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, in continuing our conversations around equity and the marijuana industry and the application process, we know that there are other licenses that are going to come down the pike around home deliveries and social consumption, and just trying to make sure that we're prepared this time to address equity around that application process for those licenses. I would like to ask the mayor and this council if we can consider a subcommittee, a committee that's staffed with members who are knowledgeable. We all saw how a lack of knowledge created this confusion in the past around these licenses. And so I would really like to see some folks on a committee that are knowledgeable, be able to make sure that there is a fair process this time. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor, do you wish to comment before we?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilor Cardozo again. I mean, I first of all want to commend the council because I believe the revised ordinance that you respectfully incorporated increases the number, and that will help create some equity relative to the total number distributed in the city of Brockton. But I would support this. I mean, I'm not opposed to it in any way. I mean, I think as long as an advisory committee designated by the mayor, now it's me and whoever the next mayor will be, I think it's important. The only thing that I would just want to bring out there is I believe that Attorney Bridges in her role as city solicitor would need to help because we would need to figure out the membership, the total number, what Councilor Cardozo just talked about, professional qualifications, skill sets. So we have a really good background of people that would be on this committee. But I wouldn't be opposed to this anyway. I know the city of Salem, Mayor Driscoll has something similar like this, the mayor's committee. And again, I just want to thank Councilor Cardozo for bringing this to the attention tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask Attorney Bridges if she knows how these committees are set up and how and when should we set up something like this? Can it be something we do now or kind of wait to see how things play out since this is ever changing on the state level as far as the Cannabis Commission? What are your thoughts on this committee and how should we go about it?
Thank you for the question, and I second the mayor's sentiment that I appreciate this topic being brought up and sort of transparency in the process of how marijuana licenses work and are awarded. I think the most sort of important piece of this conversation, so everyone is on even footing, is that an advisory committee advises the mayor, and it's unclear from the resolve if you're focusing on host community agreements or just the topic of marijuana. So I think just the topic of marijuana, and I would defer to Attorney Resnick, would be within the purview of the council to create its own subcommittee. If you all wish to do something like that, it may require an ordinance change, but I'd leave those sort of comments to her. In terms of the actual HCA process and, either attracting applicants to the city or vetting applicants who wish to bring their business to the city, there is no necessary legal format or roadmap that has to be followed. It is discretionary. And so is the issuance of HCAs. So although the advisory group may be formed, the authority over the HCA still lies within the executive. But the advisory groups certainly present a powerful tool to, provide information and insight to the mayor's office on specifically here, the topic of marijuana and applicants. Other communities, Somerville, Cambridge, Salem, there are many, have formed this type of advisory group where information is made public as to what's required of applicants, and then they're vetted and a recommendation is made to the mayor. So based on the mayor's support of this endeavor, I am happy to work with yourself and Shannon on any legal concerns necessitating its setup. And certainly I think your perspective is important on who should be staffed on the committee. It would be volunteers. And then the clarity on whether or not this is a group that is assessing just the presence and issues surrounding marijuana in the city, or whether it's to vet applicants who wish to bring their business here.
Thank you, Attorney Bridges. I would say it's the HCA process, more importantly, and it would be vetting those folks. So would it be a scenario where the mayor would appoint members of this committee, or how would we go about it? And then maybe the council would review, or how would it play out, so to speak?
I don't think it would be, my initial opinion on it is that it wouldn't be that formal of a process.
Mm-hmm.
This would be an opportunity for an informal coordination of efforts. Because I think, I don't stand to abridge the council's authority whatsoever. You all can, by ordinance, create bodies and committees and advisories. But what the effect they may have on the HCA process would be none, essentially, other than advisory. Whether you all work together to create it or the city council created it on its own.
Okay, and can I just ask one more question? Because after I filed this resolve with the help of Attorney Resnick, some questions came up about how do we continue to monitor these establishments that are already licensed? Does that live, just like this, similar to what we have on License Commission, how they kind of monitor and they could, enforce some codes or what have you, some regulations? Where would this live as far as like the establishments that we've already given licenses to that will open up? So that I guess the question was, who's going to continue to monitor these establishments moving forward? And that's something that I really didn't consider during this resolve, because maybe that could have been all the same committee, I guess. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I would suggest that the licensed marijuana establishments are treated in the same fashion as licensed liquor establishments. Mm-hmm. That code enforcement is utilized, that the License Commission agents are utilized. For example, members of the police department review the security plans with every individual who files an application for marijuana. So there are some folks, although maybe not code enforcement yet, dealing in the police department with marijuana. So I think that the purview for code enforcement per the ordinance still falls under the License Commission.
Okay.
But to your inquiry, I think if there are specific issues that you are either aware of or are, thoughtful about or predicting, then we should have that conversation, because Attorney Resnick and I have discussed specific places in the marijuana licensing ordinance that need to be amended. Mm-hmm. And as delivery is coming, now is the time to deal with that. And so a holistic review of some of the bones of the ordinance, I think, is appropriate.
Okay, that makes sense. But for the purpose of this resolve, if the mayor is agreeable for us to set up a committee, then that committee could be set up just by the council, or would the mayor have some involvement? How would we go about it?
I would defer to the mayor's comments. He's been on the council for 14 years, and certainly now in the executive body. My thoughts on it are that it would be, an informal process. So working with the mayor's office directly and Attorney Resnick, presumably, President Farwell and yourself would be, I think, the best way to do it. Because again, the body is advisory.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Attorney Bridges.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Councilor
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Rodriguez?
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Never
There
mind.
you go.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with the premise of what Council Cardoza is trying to do in terms of establishing this committee. But to be honest and frank with you, I think we might be a year and a half too late as far as this committee is concerned, because we have basically licensed or in the process of licensing every single person that's eligible for licenses in the city. And frankly, what I see happening with a creation of an advisory committee will do nothing but muddy the water as far as marijuana is concerned. The council came up with some questions, some legit questions in terms of who the policing of the marijuana facilities are. And as someone that actually work on that ordinance, it's pretty clear on the ordinance who basically does the policing, which is the licensing commission, as they do with the liquor establishments here in the city. So if we create a committee now where we actually have done most of the walk in terms of deciding on the number of licenses, we're in the process of, I saw an email that came through today now to review some of the last few licenses that are available in the city in the sense. I think we will end up muddying the water and create, we're leaving room for people to basically create all kinds of interpretations as we move forward with this stuff. And I think, to be honest with you, it would be probably counterproductive at this point. Some of these other communities that have these committee in place, they actually created the committees long before their ordinances went into fruition or into action. So if we had done this early on, it would probably make sense. But now that we've actually taken the steps that we're taking and the decisions that we've made, I think it might be a little too late to create a committee that actually will have some sort of an advisory role, because that process has already taken place. So I think this comes back, I believe, to the council in the sense where we can have a review from time to time and bring these, the licensing commission, the mayor's office, or whoever else we might want to bring in front of us just to give us a general update of what's going on in terms of anything, since we technically we're the deciders of who gets the license in the city. The licensing authority lies with the city council, not with the mayor, not with the licensing commission. So it makes sense to file a resolve from time to time to bring these individuals in to discuss the issue. But in terms of creating a committee, I think right now it's that ship basically, I think, sailed a long time ago, and I think it's just going to muddy the water as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? I have a legal question for Attorney Resnick. If we had an advisory committee, Attorney Resnick, and someone filed an application for a retail marijuana license with the clerk, and the clerk would process it and perhaps put it on the next agenda. If we had the advisory committee, would that mean that we'd actually have to call a timeout, schedule a meeting of the advisory committee, go through a review of that particular application, and then place it on a council agenda? In other words, would we be creating an additional step which is not right now in the ordinance and which could cost an applicant legal fees if they wanted to be represented before the advisory committee? Or give me your best judgment here, because that worries me a little bit.
So that would not be required for their approval for their licenses to go before the advisory for input. The reason why this was submitted as a resolve instead of an ordinance change was because Councilor Cardoza had interest from citizens and residents who wanted to be part of the committee. So typically the committees that are adopted by the council are made up of the 11 members of this body. So that's why it's a resolve to encourage the mayor on the executive side to establish that committee. I, in discussing with Councilor Cardoza, envisioned it more of a discussion base, because one of the big changes that the city will see is opening of delivery licenses in the city, potentially social consumption licenses in the city. So there are discussions that could be had in an advisory capacity on those generally, as opposed to an individual applicant. But your ordinances as written would not require an applicant to be vetted by the advisory committee. And then just for the council to know, I have drafted the change for delivery of licenses. So it will be presented for the council's review probably within the next month.
But if you, I guess my legal question is, if you do create this committee and you did not give someone an opportunity to go before that advisory committee, would we then be perhaps subject to criticism or a legal challenge because they weren't given the same opportunity as others?
No, I mean, an advisory has no weight in terms of forcing the council to say yes or to say no or to consider it at all. Typically, advisory committees don't review applicants. Typically, an advisory committee discusses a topic in its general sense. But if you're going to put one applicant through the advisory committee, you should put all of them through the advisory committee. You have to put them on an even playing field. I'm just saying I don't think you have to put any of them through an advisory committee review.
Legally, then, what authority would the committee have? I guess that's what I'm trying to get out to the public.
Under your ordinances, you don't have anything. You'd have to amend your ordinance saying that they'd have to be reviewed by the advisory committee.
Thank you. I apologize, councilors. Anyone else?
Councilor.
Councilor Cruz, you have not spoken.
Thank you. I just, a little bit, what you asked confused me, and I maybe threw you to Councilor Cardoso. I mean, I would see this not it's not a decision-making authority. I think it would help us. We're going to have two major changes in the next year or two with the home delivery and the social consumption. What I would see this is, and I agree with Councilor Rodriguez, for what we've done, the horse is out of the barn. But as we design these next two steps, we want to make sure we don't make the same mistakes we made the first time. So I would envision this committee as advising and helping the council to come to a little bit better and smoother process for making the ordinances for the next two steps. I don't envision that they would have any authority to review individual applications. I think that could cause a problem. And again, when you have a time frame that we have to answer, which I assume will be in the next steps from the state also, that the committee really, I would think it's not a bad idea. You know, we started from scratch and we floundered around and we got to where we are. Let's not do that in the next two steps. And if we can get a committee that can help give us some advice, I would also recommend that anybody who serves on this committee is not allowed to become a partner or an applicant, because the clearly would be even down the road, because it would, you know, there'd have to be some kind of time frame where they, you know, left. But I don't see the committee having any authority. I see the committee helping us to design the next two steps of the process and the process going forward for any new licenses that come up, because we will have, we've decided to go to 14, but that doesn't mean all 14 will stay in business. Somebody may turn their license back in, somebody may not qualify. So I guess through you to Councilor Cardoso, is that how you envision this, or do you envision this as actually making decisions on licenses, which that
yes. Thank you, Councilor Cruz. I'm over here shaking my head like, yes, exactly what you said. And I think Attorney Bridges was raising her hand before me, but we do have other license types, I guess, coming down the pike. And we have, social consumption. And like what you said, if someone's license doesn't necessarily come to fruition, their business, then that leaves an open license. So I think a committee to kind of look at these things so we don't make the same mistakes that we did in the past, and folks that really are knowledgeable in this subject area would really guide the council. I had to do a lot of research and digging, and I'm still confused about a lot of the Cannabis Commission guidelines, so I think, having folks that are here to guide us would be really good. And yes, Councilor Cruz, I do agree that those folks shouldn't be folks that are trying to get a license themselves. Or we can talk about that later on, how that looks. But I personally would appreciate some guidance when we do make decisions on these later on as they come down the pike. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, guidance on how and not specifics. That I think is fine, and I think it could help us because again, and I think the Cannabis Commission is still confused themselves sometimes. Seems to change almost daily, but there are two major steps coming up that they're going to be coming out with in the next, who knows, months to year, whatever. But the home delivery and the social consumption, it doesn't hurt to have somebody to help us get it right and save ourselves some work and some confusion. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
You're welcome, Councilor. Solicitor Bridges.
Thank you. I don't know how to turn my hand off, but I had raised my hand because in my initial exchange with Councilor Cardozo, I was sort of trying to get to this point that it was unclear to me what you all are looking for. Is sort of an expert and community integrated panel that provides you information on the topic of marijuana and where it's going with community input and those who are in the industry, or is it an advisory group that reviews applications for folks who want to bring their business to the city? Because right now, I don't think necessarily either one of those things exist. And sort of to Councilor Rodriguez's point, while the retail HCA or while the retail license issue may be settled for the moment, marijuana regulation and law is changing very rapidly all the time. And retail operations are not the only license class. Manufacturing, cultivation, and there's lots of different tiers of cultivation. Delivery is on the horizon. Social consumption may be on the horizon. I think it requires a referendum vote, but either way, it's not just with retail. So the idea of potentially, a roadmap of where the city wants to go with marijuana, I think is still important. And while it may have been nice to have it, 1.5 or so years ago, it would still be good to have it now. And then on the piece about where marijuana is going, for anyone who's interested, I'll send you the details, but I'm participating in a panel on Thursday with the chairman of the CCC, Steve Hoffman, on the issue of delivery and specifically municipal considerations.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes,
Councilor Nicastro.
thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, Attorney Bridges. Well, historically, those host agreements were given out by prior mayor, and that's where the problems arose as to the class of applicant who received them and all that. But I have to agree with Councilor Rodriguez. It's too late. They've already been given out. Yes, we will have some in the future, but not nearly the amount that we had initially. I think if Mayor Sullivan and future mayors are willing to work with an advisory committee, that's within the purview of the executive office. We don't have to get involved in that. I myself am not, I can see seeking advice for the council from consultants or from our legislative council or our city solicitor, but I can't see the council being put in the place of having to seek advice from an advisory committee. I think that's better suited to the executive branch, to the mayor. And also, as for enforcement in the future, we have an ordinance that sets all of that out, that puts that power in the hands of the License Commission, and I'm comfortable with that. So as for delivery, I have a question. As for delivery and social consumption, are those two classes going to require something along the lines of a host community agreement? Is it going to be the same kind of thing where the mayor takes the first swing and then we come in afterwards? I don't know the answers to that. Counselor Resnick? I'm sorry, Attorney
No.
Resnick.
The processes will be the same. The only difference, so what I've already started to draft is the delivery changes. There's a bunch of different classes of delivery. On-site social consumption, they're actually doing like a pilot program. So a municipality would need to reach out to the CCC to say like, we're interested in this. So that is something that I think can wait a little longer than the delivery side, but the delivery would act. I was surprised how little I needed to propose for a change in the ordinances because it's just another class of licenses.
I personally have reservations on delivery, not that the CCC cared about my opinion because I did write to them. I remain concerned that our existing license holders will have, who aren't even up and running other than in good health, will have their business cut into by delivery coming from other communities. But the CCC did not have a concern with that. I think we owe it to our current license holders to do all we can for them. But I guess we can't preclude it in Brockton. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councilor Rodriguez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to go back and kind of rehash this up a little bit. I'm not opposed to creating an advisory body to advise any of us, both the mayor and the city council, in terms of whatever we need. But I just wanted to be frank and honest with people as well. I don't want to sell our community short, and I don't want these individuals to be thinking that we are giving them a forum where they actually have an input of what goes on if that decision in terms of the host agreement lies with the mayor and then the licensing is with the city council. I don't want to sell these individuals short because, and this is what I said about the muddying of the water, is because if you give community folks a forum where they can come in and they're providing you an advice that they think you're going to follow, whether it might be against what you're thinking. I mean, after all, the mayor is charged with the running of the city, and he's going to run it based on the way his advisors, his immediate advisors and department heads and some of the other people that he deals with are advising him. So I feel that I also look at it from this point. We try to appease sometimes certain individuals in the community by giving them a certain place or forum so that they can actually bring up their concerns. But it needs to be made clear that it's just a place that they can bring up their concern and not have a major input into the way the body decides one way or the other. Because if that doesn't happen, then you're going to have what ends up happening a lot of times, a group of people protesting or having some issues the way the decisions were made. So I just want to make sure that we're not selling these folks short and promising things that we cannot deliver, because those decisions do not lie on one person or a body like ours. So we just need to make sure that we understand that we can only swallow what we chew, and we cannot sit here and figure out exactly trying to do things that we can't do, or give certain folks some power or some responsibilities or some wiggle areas that they are not allowed to have or should have. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about this, because I'd rather have us move forward with the things that we can control versus things that we can't control. Right now, the licensing lies in the hands of the council. The authority in terms of whether or not those licenses are being brought to fruition as they should is in the hands of the licensing commission. The mayor is responsible for community host agreements, and it's up to the mayor to give those community host agreements as he sees fit, at least for the next few years that Mayor Sullivan is in place. And it's up to us as the council to decide who gets the licenses as we move forward. So I want to make sure that, again, we're not selling our folks short or promising things that we can't deliver. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Anyone else before I go to Councilor Cardozo? Councilor Cardozo.
Okay, thank you all for this discussion. I think that it's important for us to look back at how we went about this process and in the last few months of how all of the discussions that we had around this issue, and to kind of, realize that it was a lack of information. We didn't have all the information that we needed necessary to make those decisions. So yes, we're the licensing body, and yes, we're the legislative body, but we don't oftentimes have all of the information, especially in an industry where the information's changing constantly. So I think having a body that can advise us is important, especially around issues of equity. We did decide to form a diversity committee, correct, made up of folks of this body a couple weeks ago, and we voted on that. And Attorney Resnick and I had discussed a little bit about how that body could help ensure that there's some equity in this process. But again, we are still, even myself, who's been in communication with a lot of folks that are knowledgeable in this industry, I'm still confused. So I can imagine there are a lot of folks, a lot of the other councils that really don't understand the process and they're not keeping up to date. Whereas this advisory committee will be made up of folks that are keeping up to date because they're directly connected to the industry. They're in the industry themselves. So I think it would be a disservice for us not to entertain something like this. I mean, I can have separate conversations with the mayor around this, but we have some other things, like I said, coming down the pike. And I think we want to be prepared so we don't make the same mistakes we did last time. And that's the reason why I filed this resolve. And I hope that the council would, would entertain it. It would only benefit us. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would move to send this back to the full council favorably.
Second.
Attorney Resnick, another legal question. You raised something interesting. If all of the different classes of licenses for marijuana require a host community agreement, then technically, at least now as the law is constituted, the mayor basically decides whether someone can go forward with a license application or not, whether it's for social consumption or delivery or some other purpose, because without an HCA, nothing is going to reach us. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it was with the retail as well.
Yes, I mean, that's, so whatever comes to us is first going to have to go through the mayor's office.
Correct. But I mean, I guess I don't want to give a legal opinion that's binding on the city, but I could see if there was a delivery applicant who there's no moratorium preventing a delivery license from granting, and the only thing interfering is an executive branch grant of an HCA. I could see someone challenging that in court. No offense to the mayor.
Okay. All right. There has been a motion made and properly seconded to recommend favorably with the clerk.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Do you mind if I just ask a question to Attorney Resnick?
No, go ahead. Please do.
Attorney Resnick, so I'm trying to figure this out. So there's two things that were discussed tonight: an advisory board for the council relative to future licenses, and also an advisory board out of the mayor's office relative to future host agreements. And that's within the purview of the executive body. I guess my question would be is if I instituted an advisory board and I designated two councilors to sit on that advisory board, I would think that there is a potential conflict of interest, because that same business group that gets vetted out by an advisory board could potentially then get a host agreement and appear before the legislative body for a license where those two members could be on the board for voting purposes, correct?
It could be, but I mean, the State Ethics Commission has held that, like, if you were to vote on something on the planning board, you could still vote on it as the full city council. So it'd be something that the councilors would need to seek advice from that commission.
Okay.
But the way that the resolve was originally presented to me was that it was having a discussion, like an informed discussion about, what are some of the impacts and maybe the issues that the counselors and the legal team just don't see, because we're not in the field of operating marijuana licenses.
I get you. Thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Azak,
Yes.
Cardozo,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Eaniri. Counselor Eaniri. Farwell,
No.
Lally,
No.
Mendez,
Yes.
Monahan,
Yes.
Nicastro. Counselor Nicastro. Rodriguez,
No.
Thompson,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
I couldn't unmute.
was it
You
a
want my
yes
vote?
or a, yes, please?
Okay, I'm a no.
Thank you. And Counselor Eaniri,
I'm a no.
thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yays. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no's.
Recommended favorably to the full city council. That concludes the regular agenda, councilors. Counselor Azak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A moment of council's recognition, please.
Wow.
Please
I would just, thank you. I would just like to, I have a couple of announcements for everyone at home and for my fellow colleagues. There will be a public meeting via Zoom webinar for the Public Safety Complex on Thursday, March 25th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. There will be more information to come from the mayor's office, and please check the city website for information as well. I believe the mayor had mentioned that there would be an email to send questions into. So I'm just, for everybody, we're just giving you a little bit of heads up to keep March 25th from 6 to 7:30 open for a webinar on the Public Safety Complex. I would also like to tell everyone at home that the Cultural Council will meet on Thursday, April 9th at 6 p.m. at the North Baptist Church, which is located at 899 North Main Street. And the main discussion that the Cultural Council is discussing right now is the 50th anniversary of Summerfest. So all are welcome, and we're looking forward to really planning this wonderful event for this coming year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Council recognition? All right, if not, thank you all. Thank you for a spirited debate, and have a
Night,
great
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Stay
everyone.
safe. Have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night.